What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by two of the best in the business, Chris Fedor, Jimmy Watkins, and we got some news for you guys to discuss today. The Cavs have finally selected their next head coach, and it's Kenny Atkinson. He's a guy who has experience as a head coach previously with the Brooklyn Nets. He's a guy that is coming off a tenure with being the assistant coach to Steve Kerr. And it's a guy that has been in the running for a long time now. Chris, first and foremost, how do you feel that the Cavs went about this decision and the decision as a whole? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's not surprising to me, guys, that they went into it with a general idea of what they were looking for in their next head coach. However, they ended up with Kenny Atkinson. I do think they had a plan in place. I think they interviewed a number of different guys. I was told upwards of 10. Some of those were over Zoom. Others were in person. Then they narrowed down their candidate pool. And then it seemed like from the very beginning, it was probably going to be between James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson. And at the very end, it was between James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson. And it was just about what kinds of things were they looking for from the head coach. And I don't want to say that they ruled out first-time assistants completely, because that wouldn't have been doing themselves justice during the search. You have to dig into a lot of different aspects of these coaching candidates. But it just felt like from the very beginning, guys, that this wasn't a job that was earmarked for a first-time head coach. It was a job with everything that's at stake for this organization. It was a job for somebody with previous head coaching experience. And I just think when you look at Kenny Atkinson, his resume, he's been around Ty Lue, been around Mike D'Antonio, been around Mike Budenholzer, been around Steve Kerr. You're talking about well-respected coaches currently in the NBA or throughout history in the NBA when you're talking about Mike D'Antonio and everything that he meant to how this game has changed over the last decade and a half. Being able to learn from those guys, take concepts from those guys, grow as a person, grow as a coach. I think those things obviously appealed to the Cavs. And I think the final thing is his player development. Guys that have been with him have raved about how much they have gotten better under his watch. He started his career as a player development coach. The Cavs are very invested in Evan Mobley and getting the most out of Evan Mobley. And I think they believe somebody who has groomed players in the past, including Jared Allen, by the way, including Jonathan Kuminga with the Golden State Warriors. I think they believe that this is the kind of guy for this situation. He checks enough of the boxes that they're comfortable with this hire.
He checks enough of the boxes. It's an interesting way to phrase that. And I think that's interesting because I don't know that there was anybody who checked all of the boxes, right? Like we look at Atkinson and Borrego, who were the two top guys pretty clearly, both the two most prominent candidates with head coaching experience. But the one thing that neither one of them can check, they've got the head coaching experience, they've got the dynamic offensive ideas, they've got the player development background, they've got a history of getting more out of their rosters than maybe we thought those rosters could give, right? But neither one of them have ever been on a big time playoff stage, and neither one of them have been in this kind of situation where the Cavs, like, it's kind of the same reason the Cavs ruled out first time assistants. There's so much urgency right now with this team, and there's so much riding on, frankly, Donovan Mitchell's day-to-day mood, like making sure that he feels comfortable with the direction of the franchise at all times. And Kenny is a very interesting candidate in that way, particularly because of how his tenure ended in Brooklyn. For those who don't remember, Kenny Atkinson coached the Brooklyn Nets for 4 years. The first 3 of those years, they were in like the NBA desert wasteland still because of the Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce trade, and they were just slapping together a roster with whatever they could find. And that team got better every year. I think they were a top 10 defense by the time his tenure ended there, and they actually made a playoff run with a group that no one expected to make the playoffs, frankly. But then Kyrie and Kevin Durant come in, and about 60 games into their first season there, Durant's hurt during this time. They kind of, I don't know, force him out, basically. There was a quote that Kenny gave, that Sean Marks gave to the New York Post in the immediate aftermath of that, where Marks said that Kenny basically came to Marks and said, yeah, I don't think my voice is resonating with this group the same way it did with the previous groups we've had. I think being around Ty Lue can help with that coaching development that maybe needed to take place with Kenny Atkinson a lot. Steve Kerr is the same way. Steve Kerr comes from like the Popovich, Phil Jackson tree of philosophy. Coaching is more than X's and O's. It's about people management, right? But I think that's the X factor that we cannot know until we see it in this hire is how does Kenny Atkinson handle the amount of pressure that's on him right now, and how is he going to handle the dynamic with Donovan Mitchell, who, to be clear, is a much easier superstar to manage than Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant have been historically. Those guys, like that situation, I wrote about this for the website today, and it is a question about Kenny, but at the same time, that situation ended in Brooklyn as much because Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving can be, let's say, a little mercurial.
Yeah.
I'm not good at pronouncing words today. Mercurial.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Donovan Mitchell, he's just a little bit more easygoing, it seems like, than those other two guys.
Yeah, and I think a point that you made that I found rather interesting while doing research is that it was Kevin Durant didn't play in the last season of Kenny Atkinson's tenure with the Brooklyn Nets. And the Brooklyn Nets were a 40-plus win team in his third season before Kyrie Irving got there. So it was a question of what he was able to do with the superstars, what he was able to do to manage the locker room, and things of that nature that you mentioned, Jimmy.
Real quick, I just want to, one thing that just came into my mind. Kyrie Irving, shortly after this, when they were hiring Steve Nash, Kyrie Irving literally said the words, "We don't need a coach," or something to that effect. So that's what Kenny was dealing with over there.
And I think that's important to note because we know that then Kenny Atkinson went and joined Steve Kerr and was around superstars that are more likable, like Stephen Curry, but also had to deal with personalities like Draymond Green in the same breath. So you get that experience. And then we also learned that in the 2022 year, when they were in the NBA Finals and Kenny Atkinson reportedly got an offer from the Charlotte Hornets for that head coaching job and then took it back and all of that nonsense. But to me, when that happened, it came off to me that he was ready and a part of an organization that was made off winning. They are a winning organization when it comes to the Golden State Warriors. Charlotte, we all know, are not at this point. The Cleveland Cavaliers are in the front seat to make the jump to the Eastern Conference Finals, NBA Finals, and I think Kenny Atkinson is trying to show that he is ready to be a part again with a winning organization. And I think that is something that is necessary to make point of because of the kind of messiness that did occur in Brooklyn. So, Chris, what do you think of that whole dynamic and him being able to manage relationships and players, but also noting how good he has been as a player development coach?
Well, I think there are a couple of things, guys. First of all, I talked to a lot of different people about the whole Kenny Atkinson situation with Charlotte and him ultimately deciding that wasn't the situation for him, pulling out of the head coaching job. He accepted the job and he decided against it. There were a couple of things involved with that. Number one, if you remember, he spent basically a cup of coffee with the Los Angeles Clippers. And then he went to Golden State. And like Golden State was a place that he thought he was going to be for a while. He has a family, he has a wife, and he had taken his family from Los Angeles to Golden State. And then he would have been taking his family from Los Angeles to Golden State to Charlotte in such a small stretch. And I think part of him, after discussing it more with his wife and with his family, they didn't want to take the kids out of school. They didn't want to uproot the family again. There were some dynamics in play from that standpoint. And I think they had just won a championship in Golden State. And it was a really, really good situation. I think he understood that not that his star was on the rise, but he was somebody that other teams around the NBA were interested in, and they were going to be interested in him regardless. But if you're a head coach and you have the kind of exit that he did in Brooklyn once already, you have to be pretty judicious about the next shot that you take with an organization. You have to make sure that it's right for you, for your family, and it sets you up for success. And I think after thinking about it more, from everything that I had heard, Kenny decided that wasn't the best situation for him in Charlotte. That he wanted something with a little bit more stability, a little bit more structure, and he felt like he had positioned himself to be a little bit more judicious when it came to which decision he was going to make for his next head coaching job. In a roundabout way, he felt like there was a better position eventually waiting for him in the future than the one in Charlotte. Because if he would have gone to Charlotte and failed again, the view of Kenny Atkinson, it's different, right? There's a legitimate question about, do you get a third shot as a head coach? So I think he just wanted a situation where he felt better about his chances of succeeding. And at that time, it just wasn't the Hornets. There were a lot of things going on in Charlotte. There still are a lot of things going on with the Hornets. So, he was a little bit more patient. He was a little bit more choosy, and it ended up with him coming here to Cleveland. And I think everybody would say that the situation right now in Cleveland, for all of this uncertainty surrounding Donovan Mitchell, for all the things that you want to say about Dan Gilbert being a wild card in the organization, the same reputation that he has had for the last 15 years or so, for all the things that you can say that might be flawed within this organization, the roster construction, all that stuff. It is a better situation. It is a more secure situation. It sets him up better to have success than the Charlotte job in 2022. So that's what I learned about that situation recently. And I think, we've talked about this before on the podcast, guys. So much about success when it comes to a coach is the situation that you're put into. And I think certain coaches are right for certain situations and certain setups, and other ones are better off in other ones. JB Biggerstaff is looked at around the NBA as a guy who can help instill a culture, can help pull a team out of a rebuild, can put principles in place, and all of those things that are really, really important for a young team that is in the middle of a rebuild. But there are questions about him as a tactician, about his offensive design, his offensive creativity, and all the stuff that matters more when you get into the situation that the Cavs are in. And I do think Kenny, being around Los Angeles, star-studded Los Angeles, Kawhi, Paul George, seeing how Ty Lue managed those personalities, how he handled that kind of pressure and those expectations, that was important for somebody like Kenny Atkinson. I also think being in Golden State, around that organization, seeing how to win, seeing what it takes to win, seeing the day-to-day things that are required when it comes to winning, seeing what success looks like at the highest level. I think that's very, very helpful too for him coming into this situation where there is going to be pressure. There are going to be expectations. This is a team that is coming off back-to-back playoff appearances, coming off an Eastern Conference semifinals berth, and they're expected to do more. He's going to be expected to do more than what JB Bickerstaff did. And I think all of his stops after Brooklyn set him up better for that than if he would have gone to Charlotte.
So Chris mentioned our friend, the godfather of Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, Dan Gilbert there. And I'm glad he did, because my initial reaction this morning when we heard the news that Kenny was the coach, I was like, not James Borrego, huh? It's kind of interesting. And I think in my head, there are two reasons why that situation could have changed. One is on the Cavs side, one's on Borrego's side. Mm-hmm. So Borrego has been seems like from what we were hearing, what we've been reporting, Borrego was leader in the clubhouse for a while, at least in the early stages of this coaching process. coaching search process. And then sometime middle of last week or so, things started to shift in a little bit. So around that same time, the Pistons fired Monty Williams. Pistons are run by Trajan Langdon, who used to work in Cleveland, obviously, and used to work with James, who has ties with James Borrego, obviously, because of their New Orleans stints together. So from the Borrego side, I'm wondering, did he tell the Cavs either I want to wait a little longer and hear out my buddy in Detroit here about what they've got going on over there? I like the security of having that interpersonal relationship with my potential boss. Or do I even want to take that job? Like, are we going to hear in the next couple hours that the Pistons are hiring James Borrego, and that's why this happened? Or did the Cavs had a little powwow last week with Dan Gilbert? Did Dan Gilbert inject himself into the conversation here and say, I like Kenny Atkinson more than James Borrego? I don't know, that the Atkinson news kind of surprised me a little bit, and I'm just wondering what we think shifted under the surface there.
Well, so the meeting with Dan Gilbert happened on Wednesday, from what I'm told, middle of last week. And it's interesting that you bring that up, Jimmy and Ethan, because going into the weekend, I started getting a lot of texts from a lot of people around the NBA, those that were reaching out to me, those that I reached out to. And they said, Kenny Atkinson is not out of this thing. Now, look, Atkinson was somebody who was labeled the front runner from the very beginning by a reliable source to me. The first article that I put out after JB Biggerstaff got fired and after the Cavs started this coaching search, somebody said it's Atkinson's to lose, that he was the front runner from the beginning. But there was a lot of momentum for James Borrego. There was a great feeling that the organization had when it came to James Borrego. Did really, really good in his interviews, both over Zoom and in person. Had dinner with the organization, right? The feedback that they got from former players, other coaches, executives around the NBA, people that the Cavs front office, people that they trust, that they reached out to during the entire process. That feedback that they were getting on Borrego was very, very flattering. Same thing with Kenny Atkinson. So I think he was always in the running, but it did feel like the shift happened a little bit, or at least people around the NBA believed that the shift was happening a little bit after that meeting with Dan Gilbert and going into this weekend. And Dan is always going to be involved in every big decision that this organization makes. That's his job. That's his right. That's how he likes to operate this organization, and this organization belongs to him. So he is going to have a say. He is going to be prominent in every big decision that this organization makes. And it does feel like that meeting between team decision makers and Dan Gilbert, the lead executives that were running the search, was really, really important in terms of them going down this road. I also think the timing of this can't be overlooked. Number one, the draft being right around the corner. The Cavs said from the very beginning, even though it was a moving target, the Cavs said from the very beginning, if they could have this done by the time that the draft happened on Wednesday night, that would be beneficial for them. That would be preferable for them. So when you're operating with a quote unquote deadline, however loose that deadline is, there's a little bit more urgency, right? When you have another team that pops up with a coaching opening and it's no longer just you and the Lakers, or in some cases just you out there that hasn't hired a coach, you have a little bit more urgency, right? I think the Cavs conducted this thing at the pace, in part at the pace that they did, because it was just them and the Lakers. And there was a belief around the NBA that if the Lakers couldn't woo Dan Hurley out of Connecticut, that it was going to be JJ Redick, right? So the Cavs didn't feel in some ways any kind of urgency to get something done from that standpoint, because who were they competing with for a coach? They could take their time. They could do the process the way that they wanted to. But when the Pistons job popped up, obviously that brought another team in the mix. That brought another team into the mix that had some ties to the top two guys that the Cavs were looking at, because Atkinson was with Langdon in Brooklyn too. Can't forget that. So I do think there was a little bit more urgency for the Cavs to get this thing completed, not just by draft night, but because of the other opening that popped up in the NBA and how those candidates played into that particular search for the Pistons in a way that they didn't as strongly as the one for the Lakers, because it just seemed like it was either Dan Hurley's job or JJ Redick's job from the very beginning.
Two things real quick. Sorry, Ethan. First of all, for the Cavs fans who are saying, why would the Pistons job be considered competition for the Cavs job? That makes no sense. The Pistons are the worst team in the league, basically, and the Cavs are a team that's ready to make a finals run. Two things. One, it cannot be oversold how much coaches value the relationship that they could have with their boss, that Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego could have with Trajan Langdon. That's just that dynamic can't be overstated. Two, coaches, job security is a funny thing. Winning, when you want to win more games, you choose the Cavs 12 times out of 10, obviously. But expectations are not good for job security. And the Pistons, while they certainly expect to win more than hand up, I don't know how many games the Pistons won this year. Not
14.
Very many. 14. I was going to say 18. So there you go. 14.
17 the year before. They got worse.
Yeah. They expect to win more than that. And maybe they even expect to make a, 10 seed play-in push or something next year. You have a longer runway. There will be more patience with you in Detroit than you will have with the Cavs, who, again, it's time to win big now in Cleveland. The second thing is, I don't want people to misconstrue the Dan Gilbert point here, because there is a very big difference between Dan Gilbert being like a wild outlaw who swings in on his horse.
Going rogue, yes.
Yes, swings in on his horse and says, no, stop the search. Kenny Atkinson is our guy.
Yeah.
And what more than likely happened is the Cavs say, hey, Dan, we have two really good candidates here, kind of a 1A, 1B situation. We value your input on this. He gives your input. He gives his input. Let's say he liked Kenny Atkinson, and they go, okay, we like him too. Let's do it. There's a very big difference between those two things. That's all I'll say.
And I think what you said, Jimmy, that I thought was really important that I was going to go to next was like being able to come into an organization that had one of the worst records in like NBA history and saying, hey, this might be my last shot as an NBA head coach. Maybe I take the team that I have a better, like you said, runway to be successful. Because if I take this team from 14 wins to 28 wins, that's still a success. But if I even take them even further, then I can be seen as, quote unquote, an unsung hero for that organization, depending on what happens. But you want to think about how important the Detroit Pistons job opening was for the Cavs as well, because you think about, we had talked about it, Chris, the potential that the Cavs, if there were no other head coaching jobs open, could have been able to persuade James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson to be on the same staff, potentially. But I think that it would have been hard to say that you were going to bring somebody away from another head coaching opportunity rather than having a horizontal lateral move as a assistant coach. But I had the opportunity to talk to our subtexters, as we love to do, and I got to send them a poll to see if they thought the move to get Kenny Atkinson could help the Cavs take the next step and get to the Eastern Conference Finals or the NBA Finals, which is the next step for them in the playoffs. So I sent the poll out probably about 3 hours ago, and there was a good amount of response. And the question was, I'm going to say it exactly how I wrote it, is Kenny Atkinson the right coach to lead the Cavs further into the playoffs? 78% of the vote said yes, and 22% of the vote said no. So it is kind of a toss-up. Not really. It's more so on the yes side, obviously. But I wanted to see from you guys, Chris and Jimmy, do you think that Kenny Atkinson has the right schemes on the offensive end, has the right potential for player development to bring the Cavs to where they want to go in the next couple of seasons?
I'm going to answer this thing as honestly as I possibly can. I have no freaking idea. How does anybody know? This is one of the toughest things for any Joe like us to evaluate. And here's the thing, guys. When I try to answer these questions, I ask as many smart people around the NBA for their feedback so that it can inform mine. Because like the 90% of the stuff that matters when it comes to being a head coach, I don't know that. Like Joe in Strongsville don't know that. You know what I mean? Like the 10% that we pay most attention to, like that is such a small percentage of the coaching responsibility and whether a guy is going to be successful or not successful. We can talk about lineups, right? We can talk about rotations. We can talk about X's and O's to some degree. We can talk about how does he use his coaching challenge. We can talk about all that stuff that we see, that we believe we know, right? But the behind the scenes stuff that matters more to success, how do we know that? You can't really see that. You can't judge that because you don't know it to the same level that Kenny Atkinson does. You don't know it to the same level that these organizations do. They see it on a day-to-day basis. They're there every single day. The behind the scenes stuff, the interactions with players. We don't get that stuff firsthand. And we're not knowledgeable enough on the intricate details of being a head coach in the NBA. So, like I said, I'm relying on people that I trust around the game that know way more than me because they're in the game, because they coach at the NBA level, because they evaluate these things constantly from front offices or from a scouting standpoint. And the people that I have talked to throughout the course of this coaching search about Kenny Atkinson, they all say really, really good things about him. They say he got a raw deal in Brooklyn. Say that he did a really good job with the Nets. Say that he's really good when it comes to player development, and the evidence backs that up because of the players that got better under his watch. Say that he has learned a lot from really, really smart coaches around the NBA. Like I said, Coach Bud, Mike D'Antoni, Steve Kerr, Ty Lue. Those are some really good coaches to be around that can help you become a better person and a better coach. They say that he runs really good, creative, dynamic stuff on the offensive end. They say that he's innovative and he's willing to try new things and he's got more modern principles that he leans on. All that kind of stuff is what they say. They say that he's a good teacher. They say that he's detail-oriented. They say that he's structured. Like all of those things would seem to appeal to a player, right? All those things would seem to appeal to an organization, right? So it seems like, based on the traits that he has and the feedback that I've gotten, plus the fact that he's been a head coach before, it would lead me to believe that, yeah, he can be successful. But predicting whether a coach is going to go on and be successful is a fool's errand. It's a really difficult thing. Joe Mazzulla, NBA champion Joe Mazzulla, toast of the town in Boston right now, used to be called Back Row Joe. Like everybody was making fun of him. Like, I'm sorry, they hired who? Like the best coach in the Celtics organization is the dude sitting in his perch in the front office, Brad Stevens. We got this guy? We got Joe Mazzulla? Like what? And look at him now. He's looked at as brilliant. Like really, really smart. Able to connect with players. All those different things. So I have no freaking idea if Kenny Atkinson is going to be successful and lead this team to the next level. But I will say this. The smart people that I talk to feel good about this hire from a Cavs standpoint. And it's a logical fit for this team. Because at the very least, what we know about Kenny Atkinson is that he can do this job. He can, because he has done it before. And he has had some success, a level of success in this particular role that he is taking on. I can't say that about Mike Nori if they would have hired him, the Minnesota assistant. I can't say that about Johnny Bryant if the Cavs would have hired him during this process. Like, at the very least, this guy, Kenny Atkinson, is fit for the job and can do this job because he has done it before.
For every Joe in Boston, Joe Mazzulla, there's a Joe in Strongsville trying to take him down, right?
It's just my go-to. It was the first name that came to mind. So Joe in Strongsville, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, man, that MF Chris. No. I'm not specifically talking about you, something that you texted in with Joe in Strongsville, or you called into a radio station and I heard you. I'm not saying you, Joe in Strongsville. It's just the first name that came to mind, and I usually go with Strongsville. It could be Stephen Bay Village, my neighbor.
Big day for Joe's and Steve's on the podcast. It's funny. The poll results are so funny to me because, to Chris's point, we'll see, but the fans are, I wouldn't say it's like a screaming yes on Kenny Atkinson, but it's a yes that echoes. I mean, that's basically 80-20 split. Kenny Atkinson has that new car smell to him, where it just seems like every time you get a new coach in the building, everyone's all excited. Everyone's got all this optimism about him just because change is exciting, right? But I think what this will come down to, can Kenny Atkinson lead the Cavs to whatever promised land you want to say is their promised land? Can he fix the offense? Can he raise the ceiling of this offense while maintaining the elite defense that the Cavs have put together? To Chris's point, I can't draw up on a whiteboard how he's going to do that, but I would answer that question with another question, which is, what is the roster going to look like while Kenny Atkinson tries to do that? And to that point, I was doing a little NBA.com lineup data library searching this morning. And first of all, just a fun little time machine. Kenny Atkinson's most played lineup his first year in Brooklyn: Jeremy Lin, Randy Foy, Karis LeVert, Brooke Lopez, and who's the fifth guy? Rondé Hollis Jefferson. That's my favorite. Rondé Hollis Jefferson, just a total throwback player, incredible defensive player, 6'7", can't shoot a lick, but a fun lefty guy. I just thought that was fun. The other
left-handed Isaac Okoro before Isaac Okoro came around.
There you go. I promise there's a point to this, though. Part of this is Brooklyn's roster construction at the time. They didn't have they didn't have any assets really to get the kind of players that you need to win a championship. But a theme that kept popping up as I searched through Kenny's most played lineups during his 4 years in Brooklyn, just not a lot of lineups with two non-shooters out there. So we can say he's very creative with his schemes. We can say he's learned under some great coaches and some great offensive coaches, by the way. Mike D'Antoni, Steve Kerr revolutionized the Warriors' offense. Bud just cranks out top 5 offenses in his sleep, it seems like. I'm excited to see what he does with the Suns. Ty Lue, part of it has been aided by LeBron and a very well put together Clippers roster that shoots the heck out of the ball, but Ty Lue knows how to scheme up offense. So I trust that Kenny knows what he's doing when he gets on the whiteboard, but there's only so much you can do when the spacing is cramped. So I'm fascinated to see what Kenny, if someone else doesn't ask it, I'm going to ask it at the intro presser. Like, how do you make offense work with two non-shooters, two non-shooting bigs? How do you maintain everything that the Jared Allen and Evan Mobley pairing has done for this franchise while raising the ceiling on an offense that has way too often gotten stuck in the mud in the playoffs over the last 2 seasons? I don't know the answer, but that is, I think, what this question comes down to. If Kenny Atkinson can maintain the defensive integrity that the Cavs have and get there, at times it just felt like even average offense would be good enough without the way the Cavs were strangling teams out there. There's your answer to how successful this tenure will be, but that's also related to some other big decisions that the Cavs have coming up here.
But I also think it's important to note that if there's somebody that has experience coaching Jared Allen, it's Kenny Atkinson. He's had experience coaching him in his first couple years in the NBA, and he actually helped him learn his game. Because we know that Jared Allen came into the league as a 19-year-old young kid who we knew he was big, we knew he could grab rebounds, but what are you going to do offensively? And he learned that under Kenny Atkinson, and that's also a conversation that we heard was happening around the coaching search. Was guys and people in the upper staff of the organization asking Jared Allen and Karis LeVert and having conversations about what is he like as a coach, what is he gonna bring, and like you said, Jimmy, Karis LeVert was one of the guys that he played the most in his lineups when he was in Brooklyn. Karis LeVert is now a 6-man role player for the Cavs, and how will he be able to implement him into those designs with having different ball scoring or ball dominant scorers on his team? And I think those are different questions that are both still going to be answered this offseason because, like you said, roster moves will more than likely be coming, and they are going to impact what the Cavs do and also what Kenny Atkinson does. So, I think the next question is, how do the Cavs build around Kenny Atkinson? And that's not me talking about roster moves. That's me talking about the assistant coaches, because we understand how important these guys are going to be. And we also know that the Cavs have not let go everybody from J.B. Biggerstaff's assistant coaching tree. So, Chris, I heard that you might have some sourcing on potential guys that might be coming into Cavs organization for conversations about being an assistant coach under Kenny Atkinson. What do you got for us?
Well, I think we've talked about this before, guys, on the podcast. So much of this is relationships. So much of this is about trust and connections. And when you think about when J.B. Biggerstaff came aboard, when he became the full-time coach of the Cavs, he went out and he brought in as many guys that he could, that he trusted, that he had ties with. Greg Buckner, Sidney Lowe, Luke Walton. So I just asked a few different people around the NBA, like, hey, who makes sense for Kenny Atkinson to bring to the Cavs if he becomes the coach? That was during the entire process, just so that I could try and be prepared and be ahead of the game on this sort of thing. One of the names that was brought up to me actually just took a new job. Woj reported that Chris Fleming is joining Chauncey Billups and the coaching staff there with the Portland Trailblazers. Now, that was somebody that was brought up to me because he was with Kenny kind of as Kenny's right-hand man in Brooklyn when Kenny was a head coach for the only time in the NBA. But if he's out of the mix, that becomes pretty interesting. You know, can the Cavs convince one of these guys that they talked to during this coaching search to come to Cleveland and get a cushier title than what they currently have here, so that they don't view it as a lateral move or give them a little boost in pay or give them a little bit more responsibility within the organization? That's something to watch for, because if you think about it, you know, the previous two coaching searches that the Cavs conducted, one of them ended with John Beilein. The other one ended with David Blatt. Those were examples of Dan Gilbert, by the way, going rogue. And they decided, like, hey, we got to have somebody with real big-time NBA experience in both of these situations, because David Blatt has been coaching overseas his entire life, and John Beilein's been at the college level his entire life. So, like, who can we get from an NBA perspective that can kind of show this guy the way in the NBA, that can do things from an NBA standpoint and introduce NBA principles and help them along the way? And the first time it was Ty Lue. Second time it was JB Biggerstaff. So is there somebody out there that the Cavs interviewed during this process that isn't going to get the Lakers job, obviously, and isn't going to get the Detroit Pistons job, that is willing to make a move and come to this situation and be the right-hand man of Kenny Atkinson? That's something to monitor, because the Cavs did like other candidates during this process. They just didn't feel like they were ready to be head coaches, and they didn't feel like those guys were better options than the final two, which what it felt like it came down to, Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego. The other name to watch was actually here with the Cavs. His name is Brett Brielmaier. He was with the Cavs for a number of years. The organization really likes him. The organization knows him really, really well. He was their summer league coach one year, actually. So there is a relationship there already. There is an understanding of how he is as a coach. He is also the guy most responsible for Jared Allen's development in Brooklyn. He was Jared Allen's right-hand man as a player development, the guy who was overseeing the development of Jared Allen in Brooklyn. I've talked to Jarrett many times about Brett. Every time the Cavs play against the Orlando Magic, which is where Brett Brielmeyer is right now, Jarrett has a warm embrace with him. Jarrett talks with him. They spent so many summers together. He is currently on the staff of Jamal Mosley in Orlando, but he was with Kenny Atkinson in Brooklyn. So he has that tie. He has the Cleveland ties. He's been learning from Jamal Mosley for a number of years. Like, is that somebody that the Cavs could pry away potentially? Does that then open up a spot on Jamal Mosley's coaching staff for JB Biggerstaff to join his buddy as an assistant in Orlando if JB doesn't get the Detroit job? Just spitballing, but Brett Brielmeyer is a name that was brought up to me as well. And he is still very close to a number of people inside the current Cavs organization, including Jared Allen and Kenny Atkinson, obviously.
The Jared Allen of it all is so fascinating to me because here we have a situation where Kenny Atkinson, kind of a perfect coach for Jared Allen. I saw a clip of him talking on JJ Redick's podcast earlier, like from a while back, just about his time with Kenny in Brooklyn, and very clear that Jared Allen loved playing for Kenny Atkinson. And now we're spitballing an assistant coach who has very close ties to Jared Allen. We had the whole Donovan Mitchell Instagram story saga last week where JB Bickerstaff maybe kind of sort of took a shot at Jared Allen on the radio, and then Donovan Mitchell, voices his support of Jared Allen with an Instagram story of them embracing. And yet, like a month ago, if you asked all three of us which member of the Cavs core four is most likely to be traded this offseason, I don't know, Jared Allen, Darius Garland, 1A, 1B. Like it's such a fascinating conflict because on the one hand, Jared Allen might have a bunch of new friends on the Cavs coaching staff and might have an optimized working environment. On the other hand, we all agree Evan Mobley is the most important player development story in the Cavs organization right now. And I'm just not sure still how well those two narratives can coexist. Like, can we have a perfect environment for Jared Allen to be the best Jared Allen, maybe even a better Jared Allen than we've already seen, and maximize Evan Mobley's development? Can we do that at the same time? It's a question we've been asking since they both got here. And I kind of felt like after the Boston series where Evan Mobley played the best playoff series of his career, some of the best basketball of his career in certain moments, kind of thought we had at least an inkling of an answer to that question. But now it's getting muddy. The waters are getting muddied again on this topic. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting for 100 different reasons. First off, being that we, like you said, Jerry, we've talked about Jared Allen being a trade piece and wanting to see do you think that this hire and the potential is hires from the assistant coaches that, like Jimmy said, could be friends of Jared Allen would help his case to stay on the Cavs? Or we've also talked about Karis LeVert potentially being in trade packages. Does that help his case for staying on the Cavs? And I think it's interesting also because a subtexter pointed out to me that in Woj's article about the hire for Kenny Atkinson by the Cavs, he mentioned Evan Mobley as the center of the team. He didn't say that he was the power forward or whatever. Obviously, could have just been a slip up or could have been something, whatever. He's a 7-footer. You just obviously automatically put him as the center. But what could that mean for the Cavs? All of those different things. Chris, I want to know from you, do you think that Jared Allen getting his old head coach back, potentially assistant coaches coming on that he's been around and has liked or whatever that may be, does that help his chances of not only staying with the organization, but also being happy while doing so? Because we understand that Jarrett has said on multiple occasions, his physical, he'll figure it out, but his mental is where he wants to make sure it's going to be good at all times.
I think there are three things that are going to matter most when it comes to whether Jarrett Allen is back next season or not. Number one, does Donovan Mitchell want him back? I think the answer to that is yes. Him and Jarrett are a very good pairing. The numbers point that out. Donovan has raved about Jarrett since the moment that he got here, talking about forming a pick and roll partnership, very similar to the one that he had in Utah with Rudy Gobert. Donovan has always been at his best when attacking downhill and having that kind of pick and roll dance partner. And Jarrett is one of the elite pick and roll bigs in the NBA. So that's part of it. Number two, what kinds of offers are the Cavs getting for Jarrett? What kinds of value do teams around the NBA place on Jarrett? And is there an offer out there with the kind of framework that the Cavs would be willing to say yes to? That they feel like moving on from Jarrett Allen and getting back what they would get back and reconfiguring the roster in a certain kind of way would make them a better basketball team and give them a better chance to take that step forward that they want to take. You're not just going to trade Jarrett just to trade him. You're not just going to take bad value back. It's got to be something that enhances your chances. This is a team that made the Eastern Conference semifinals. For all the flaws that you want to talk about with the roster, for all the imbalance that you want to talk about with the roster, there has been success that this organization has enjoyed to some level with the core four together, including Jarrett Allen. So that would be number two. And number three is, what is the vision that the new coach, Kenny Atkinson, has for the pairing of Evan Mobley and Jarrett? Because Evan Mobley's not going anywhere. Everybody understands that. He's going to get a fat new contract similar to the one that the Toronto Raptors are supposedly giving to Scotty Barnes, because Evan Mobley is the future of this organization. I talked to somebody earlier today, a source that we were talking through the whole Kenny Atkinson hire for the Cavs, and a big thing that was brought up to me was the development of Evan Mobley and how Kenny Atkinson's background as a player development coach and how much he values player development and the things that he has done in terms of player development, how much all of that mattered because of the view that the Cavs have of Evan Mobley, because of the value that they've placed on Mobley. And they believe that Kenny is the kind of coach that's going to get the most out of Evan Mobley, get the best out of Evan Mobley, allow him to flourish more in the offense. But that also ties into Jarrett. And if Kenny Atkinson has a real plan, a plan that makes sense, a plan that everybody agrees to, for how to play Jarrett and Evan together and why he thinks it can be successful offensively and how to work around their limitations as a duo, that is going to matter in the Jarrett Allen equation as well. So those to me are the three most important factors. Yeah, I think it's great for Jarrett that he has a coach that he's familiar with, a coach that he trusts, a coach that clearly likes him and has confidence in him. That obviously boosts his chances of remaining on this roster. But I think that's a little bit further down the list than the other things that I talked about.
We're talking a lot about Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley right now. It's weird how little Donovan Mitchell has come up on this podcast, Like we're talking about shopping assistants. What about Johnny Bryant?
Yeah, sure.
What about Johnny Bryant, the guy who helped Donovan so much at the beginning of his career in Utah? I'm also curious about how involved do we think Donovan Mitchell was? I don't want to I know this is a very delicate topic.
Yeah.
So how involved do we think he was in this coaching hire?
So from what I'm told, Donovan had multiple conversations with different candidates during the search. My understanding is that two of them were James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson. That's logical because both of those guys were perceived to be the two finalists. And Kobe Altman even said at his end-of-season press conference, the president of basketball operations said Donovan Mitchell is going to be involved. In some capacity, he's going to be involved in the decision-making of this organization. And Donovan has earned that. He has earned that level of power. They took his advice on Max Strus. They took his advice on George Niang last offseason, Ty Jerome as well. Donovan's going to be involved in the decision-making when it comes to anything with this organization. So my understanding is that he did talk to both Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego. He had long conversations with them, and Donovan signed off on both of those guys. And he signed off on this particular hire with Kenny, in part because of what he believes to be true of how he's going to be used and what this offense is going to look like under Kenny Atkinson, which, that was a problem last year with the Cavs. That was a problem the year before with JB Biggerstaff. After that flame out with the New York Knicks last April, he was basically given, I don't want to say an ultimatum, but I can't find the other word. He's basically told this past offseason, make this offense more dynamic, make this offense more creative, get more out of Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell together, find a way to make this offense a little bit closer to the defense so that we don't have a repeat in the playoffs of what we had against the Knicks. And not everybody had the confidence level in JB's offense or the belief that it was ever going to get to that point. So I think the things that Donovan has learned during the search about what the offense is going to look like under Kenny Atkinson and how Donovan is going to be used specifically, from everything that I'm told, that appealed to Donovan.
And I think that is a great point, but also the fact that Kobe Altman had talked about not wanting to break up the core four at his end of season presser. And it feels like this is one of the guys, if not the guy, that he would have needed to bring on to make that a reality. Because you understand, like you said, Chris, his player development being one of the things that he is known for. Darius Garland is someone that needs player development. That guy needs maturation, and he needs to be able to have somebody he can confide in. And having that be a head coach is a big thing as well. Then you look at Evan Mobley, and we've talked about it a lot on this podcast. The pairing of Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, and how if it's the same as it has been the last couple of seasons, it shows that it could be difficult to work. But if Kenny Atkinson comes in, gives Evan Mobley the assisted help or the player development that he needed to enhance his three-point shot, and enhance his spacing, enhance his dribbling, enhance the things that he needs to do to be able to space the floor, create on his own, and things of that nature, then the problem kind of evaporates, because you understand that Evan Mobley can do a lot of the things that are necessary to make this team go to the next level if, like we've said on multiple podcasts, he takes that next step. And Jarrett Allen is a big piece for this team, not only for Donovan Mitchell setting screens and doing those things, but also his defensive acumen and being able to crash the boards and grab rebounds. He's led the team in rebounds almost since he's been on this team. So I think it's important to look at all these different things. But I do want to kind of end this podcast on a different question for you guys. And you alluded to it, Chris, earlier with the Toronto Raptors and Scotty Barnes. We know that Evan Mobley is going to be in conversations for max contracts, for max rookie contracts. So the reported contract for Scotty Barnes is 5 years, $270 million. Do you guys think that the Cavs are going to outpay that for Evan Mobley?
To my understanding, that's the max. That's the rookie scale max contract. If my numbers are accurate, nobody's told me there was going to be math involved in this job. But if my math is accurate, that is the rookie scale max for somebody like Scotty, right?
I believe so, because he's becoming the franchise, the highest paid player in franchise history. So I believe that would have to be the case as a rookie.
I'm just saying he doesn't have like any other things that would make him qualified for.
Nah, he's not all NBA or anything like that. All defensive team or nothing like that either.
So it would be similar for Mobley.
Evan Mobley, I don't think there's going to be a ton of negotiation here. Really,
right?
Like Evan Mobley is going to get the most money he can possibly get. To the point,
and the Cavs are comfortable offering that to him,
right?
Too.
For sure, yeah, and they should be. To the point, I don't want to belabor this point, but like to the point about Mobley and Jared. Ethan said that this problem could evaporate if Evan Mobley does this, that, and the third. But we're talking about shooting here. If Evan Mobley becomes a 3-point shooter that defenses have to respect, then yeah, that problem can no longer be a problem. That's just kind of one of the hardest skills to improve drastically in the NBA. Like, it just happens so infrequently that a player, Evan Mobley has made progress. He's raised eyebrows. He had some very, like in the Orlando series, we made 2 threes in the first game. We all threw a little mini parade because those are legitimate signs of progress on a big stage. But that's when teams are letting him shoot, and then they continued letting him shoot, and then he stopped shooting them. So like, we still have such a long way to go on the Evan Mobley shooting trajectory that I just don't like. I don't even think we can talk about that problem evaporating away at this juncture. We have to see so much more from him before we can start talking about that being a legitimate solution. And honestly, I believe that Kenny Atkinson has a really good plan on how to use them together. I believe he has, using both of them as screeners and using them as DHO guys and using all the different ways that you can use non-shooters to try to mitigate the spacing issue. But the fact that there's only so much you can scheme around one guy who always, like, you have 2 guys who are most useful on offense sitting in the dunker spot.
Yeah.
That's a hard problem to get around, regardless of how many great coaching ideas you have, which is why I think the roster question is as big of a question as this coaching process was.
And Jimmy, not only just most used there, but most comfortable and most effective there, right? Because you're a coach and you're trying to maximize the abilities of your guys and what that means to your offense and maximize your offense. But if you have 2 guys that are most effective in the same spots on the floor and they occupy the same space, it's like you don't want to tell Evan Mobley consistently, hey man, get out to the perimeter. Hey man, go stand in the corner and wait for catch and shoots. You know what I mean? Because that's not best for him, and that's not going to be best for your team, because it's not where he's most comfortable and it's not where he's most effective. So it is a more complicated question, I think, than some Cavs decision makers are willing to admit it is. And, there are obvious signs that he is getting better as a shooter. His form looks a lot better. His release is higher. He's hitting the front rim, back rim, as opposed to the right, left misses and all that other stuff that they measure.
He's taking more. He's also taking more. That's good.
Yeah, he's taking more. The volume's up. He's more confident when stepping into those. That helps as well. You have to believe, if you're Evan Mobley, that that's a shot that you should take, that that's not a bad shot because he's so programmed to make the right play constantly. But, defenses still understand the limitations that he has, and defenses still understand the limitations that the Cavs have as a collective offense, with both those guys on the floor. As good as they are together defensively, as good as they are individually, just from a talent perspective, when both of those guys are on the floor, the Cavs do not and have not functioned consistently as a high-level offense. And that is something that is going to be a challenge for Kenny Atkinson. If the core 4 remains in place, if that duo remains in place, it's not going to be, I'm just going to snap my fingers and fix it. JB Biggerstaff tried a lot of different things, right? Other smart coaches would look at the situation and try and find a lot of different things. But it's just not an easy answer, because they have overlapping skills, and they have a certain comfort within their own game of where they want to be used, where they're most effective being used. That's why, you saw JB a lot throughout the course of the season say, I'm only going to play these guys a couple of different spurts together. Beginning of the game, end of the second quarter, beginning of the third quarter, sometimes end of the game. But a majority of it, about half of it, they were split apart. So maybe Kenny Atkinson feels like that is a workable solution. Split them up a little bit more. I don't know. It's not easy, though.
just to do some cleanup on the back end of some of the Evan Mobley contract discussion, it comes down to the breakout bag because of Derrick Rose, which was implemented because of the Rose rule, quote unquote. So if either of the players in question makes an All-NBA team, wins an MVP, or wins Defensive Player of the Year in the final year of the rookie deals, that $270 million rookie max contract automatically escalates into a $260 million Rose Rule deal. So the contract that was offered to that will potentially be offered to Scotty Barnes could be worth up to $270 million, which is what Woj tweeted earlier today.
Right.
And Evan Mobley did not win MVP or Defensive Player of the Year or anything like that. So that'll be a discussion that'll come this next season, and what happens, and if he's able to continue his defensive prowess, or like we've been talking about, get that offense to a new level and see if he can get into the MVP conversation. Who knows? But I think that's where I want to wrap up today's podcast. Chris, Jimmy, you have anything you want to end before we get out of here?
I do not. At the end of the day, I think the best thing that I can say about this Cavs search, no matter how you feel about the process involved and how long it took, they ended up with a very logical choice. It is a logical choice. It is a good fit for this situation that the Cavs are in. Now it's up to Kenny to make it work and make it a success, because the previous coaching searches were absolute failures.
And with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. It has not been officially announced when there will be a press conference with Kenny Atkinson, but if you want to find that out, we'll let you know as soon as it comes out, and if there's any new news when it comes to the assistant coaching search for Kenny Atkinson's staff. To get all that information, sign up for a 14-day free trial, or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris, and even sometimes Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast, and the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.